Hi, I'm Tabitha Robin. I'm mixed ancestry with both settler and Indigenous heritage, specifically through the St. Peter's Indian Band. I come from a long line of fishermen. In fact, my Icelandic and Indigenous ancestors met long ago fishing the waters of Lake Winnipeg. I am also an assistant professor in the Faculty of Land and Food Systems at the University of British Columbia, and Indigenous food sovereignty is my jam. In this episode, we are going to learn about a model of grant making used by the Northern Manitoba Food, Community and Culture Collaborative and how they approach the peer review process. This is an innovative model that gives communities more say in granting decisions. We are happy to have 4 peer reviewers to tell us about their experiences in this process, and Julie Price, a coordinator at the Northern Manitoba Food, Community and Culture Collaborative, to give us some background on how it works. Thank you for joining us today, Julie. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Julie Price. I am a person of European ancestry. My family's been here on Turtle Island for sort of 3 to 8 generations. So I connect very deeply to Manitoba, which is where my more immediate ancestors have lived. My mom is from a small farm in southwest Manitoba. My dad was born and spent his early years in at the time, a fly-in community in northern Manitoba called Snow Lake. And I've lived my whole life and been raising my family in Manitoba. I feel very responsible and connected to this place. I'm really lucky to be part of a group called the Northern Manitoba Food, Culture and Community Collaborative. When I was learning and growing in my work in the philanthropic sector, I started getting invited to communities in northern Manitoba, and am just so grateful for how much I learned from community members up there. And basically what they taught me was that to do this work well, it has to be done in relationship, and we have to work in a really good way. And it was those teachings from Northern Manitoba community members that set us on the path to create the Northern Manitoba Food, Culture and Community Collaborative, which I am still part of to this day.
Can you tell us about the collaborative and its origin story? How did it come to be and why?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Northern Manitoba Food, Culture and Community Collaborative came from basically a recognition that philanthropic organizations, charitable organizations, were not doing a very good job of providing support to communities in northern Manitoba, primarily Indigenous communities. Even if they had programs that were supposedly funding programs that were for Indigenous communities, often there were barriers in the system that made it inaccessible for communities to access that funding support. So 10 years ago now, we are in our 10th year of learning our practice and evolving our practice. 10 years ago, 3 different organizations put their heads together and said, let's try and do this in a collaborative, consensus-based way. And the idea to do that was seeded by community partners in northern Manitoba who said they really wanted helper organizations that worked together and communicated with each other and centered community needs and voice in their work. So 10 years ago, we tried to work collaboratively and together, and a lot of people thought that was a little bit radical and wouldn't work. We were told many times it wouldn't work, but here we are quite a few years later with roughly 15 philanthropic partners around the table, and we are guided by a group of Northern advisors, or our elders from Northern Manitoba, that help us really critically think through our process and make sure we're working in a good way. And we partner deeply with more than 50 communities across Northern Manitoba, supporting them in their community-led work, and to date have deployed roughly $5 million into grassroots community projects in northern Manitoba. So we have 2 main responsibilities as a collaborative. One is to provide really good, accessible, tailor-made support to communities in northern Manitoba through grants, through technical support, through network building. And our other main responsibility is to work with the circle of collaborators or funding organizations that participate in the Northern Manitoba Food Culture Community Collaborative to support learning and unlearning and demonstrate different ways of working and basically test out a whole bunch of stuff, show the benefit to supporting communities, and contribute to systems change in the philanthropic sector. So the peer review process that we're talking about today kind of sits at the intersection of those two things in my mind.
So, we're talking about a fairly major redesign of how funding processes occur. What was it like undertaking this work, and how has that changed over time?
In the beginning, there was a lot of people who said it's not possible. It's not possible to get organizations to pool their financial resources, to set their conventional metrics, success metrics aside, and put communities in the lead of defining success. It's not possible to make granting decisions by consensus and center community voices in a granting process. And luckily, we had clear, strong encouragement from a whole bunch of beautiful community people that encouraged us to keep trying, and elders that told us to be brave and keep trying hard things, and a whole bunch of funding organizations, or a few at the beginning and more now, who had some people within those organizations that were ready or able to try something out of their usual box or their own usual processes.
Thanks, Julie. Can you tell us a little bit about how the peer review process works?
It's evolved. Our granting process has evolved substantially since the beginning, but it has always included the voices, opinions, expertise, and ideas of Northern community people. And where we are 10 years into our learning and growing is understanding that a portion of our granting process, which is called the peer review process, is really, really important to both building up and empowering Northern community people to see their own deep knowledge and their ability to help and support each other, and also ensuring that the voices of these wise community folks is being centered by granting committees and offering deep learning opportunities to the granting committees and walking them through a granting process that is slower, more intentional, more grounded in deep understanding than the typical philanthropic or governmental granting process.
Thanks, Julie, for giving us background on the collaborative model and how the peer review process works. Let's bring peer reviewers into the conversation. I'm so excited for this part because I have been a peer reviewer. Would you please introduce yourselves?
My name is Brian Truan. So I live in Leaf Rapids, which is northern Manitoba. And I work with a program called Grow North. It's hosted by the Frontier School Division. And I've known Julie and NMFCCC, or the collaborative, I don't know, for quite a few years actually as well. I think the first time I seen the collaborative and Julie specifically was like in 2011. I was working in the garden, and at the time, Chuck Stensgaard, he was the gardening coordinator. And yeah, over the years, Julie just made some visits, got involved slowly but surely with the granting process in my position. And yeah, it's been an interesting learning experience.
I'm Michaela Zahoop, and I'm from the Paw and Opaskwayak Cree Nation. I attend the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. My work with the NMFCCC was part of the Opaskwayak Culture and Healthy Living Initiative's Community Garden project on OCN, Opaskwayak Cree Nation.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Daigle, and I live in Flin Flon, Manitoba. I'm sort of a transplanted city girl who ended up in this small mining town for the last 23 years. I'm a retired social worker, but I also have really been interested in gardening in the last, several years. And part of that led me to work with the Juice Plus Tower Garden Company. That affiliation led me to provide some equipment and develop a tower garden program with NACC, which has been really wonderful. It allowed me to sort of dust off my community social work skills. And I volunteered a lot of time to help support people to learn to be really successful, productive growers.
So my name's Shay Henderson, and I work with Frontier School Division as their land-based education coordinator. I grew up in Southern Ontario, but I slowly made my way further and further north, from northeastern to northwestern Ontario to southern Manitoba, and now I currently live in Churchill, Manitoba. So slowly moving further and further north. But I started with Frontier in the fall of 2021. And through my role, I get the privilege and honor of working with approximately 40 different communities across the province, so northern and rural communities, and working directly with staff, sometimes teachers, sometimes support staff, sometimes administrators, to learn about what they do for their own land-based work in the community.
Thanks for the introductions. Before we get deeper, I think it might be helpful for listeners to understand the granting process. Julie, can you walk us through it?
Yeah, our granting process, it's called an inquiries and proposals process. Early on, the elders, the Northern advisors that guide us said, you don't go around throwing out grant applications and tell people to fill them out. That's not a good way to work. So we always start our process with conversations with community partners about what their ideas are. We want to make sure our staff team, the responsibility of our staff team is to understand the projects that communities want to do and support them to articulate it in our granting proposal form, which is a fairly plain language, hopefully user-friendly form. But we start with conversation, and then if it seems like a good fit, we'll move into the proposal process. So that starts in the fall. We really want to make sure communities aren't just spending a bunch of time writing for a grant that they don't have a good chance of receiving. So we do have a very, very high proportion of people that write proposals that end up receiving the grant. So that's the first step. Once our team has that big, beautiful bundle of dreams and ideas and hopes from the communities in the form of proposals, the next thing that happens is a wonderful community of Northern people, often some are the same people that have provided proposals, are invited or asked to help with a peer review process. So my colleague Trinette Conga led that this year. She called everybody one by one to explain what it was, to say hello, to have a chat, and to ask for their help and invite them to take part in the peer reviewing process. We had about 40 people from across Northern Manitoba take part in the peer review process. These folks are community members. They are both on and off reserve. Some are in northern urban centers. Some are teachers. Some are community leaders. Some are young people. And they were all gracious to loan their time to this process. So the next step is a group orientation call. So we provide two different options for orientation calls, a lunchtime option and an after work option, to make sure people have the chance to join and get everybody on the phone, basically, or virtual call. Some people can join using a computer. Some people use the 1-800 number, and just walk through like what is the process? What's going to happen? What's expected of everyone? What are the ways that people will be thanked and honored for their time? So we talk about honorarium and feedback and learning loops in the peer review process. So following the orientation call, each peer reviewer will receive 3 or 4 projects that are connected to their own experience. So we want to make sure people are receiving projects that they feel they can reflect on and provide value to. So if you're a chicken raiser, you're probably going to see a couple of projects in your bundle that talk about poultry or livestock in the north. If you are a land-based educator, you're probably going to receive some projects that connect to land-based healing, land-based education, maybe language or cultural work. And we also consider or take into account a little bit of distance between projects. So if you are from the community of South Indian Lake, you will not be asked to review another proposal from your own community, but it would be a little further away. Just it's still not an easy thing for a lot of people to think about their hopes and dreams being reviewed by peers in the north. So we're really trying to build safe spaces and a community of support in this peer review process. It's important to understand that peer reviewers are never asked to evaluate a project. Peer reviewers are not tasked with the work of saying whether a project should or shouldn't be funded. They are asked to look at a project and help the granting committees see the strengths in that project. So they're asked to highlight what do they think is really strong about that project. And not only the granting committees, but the proponents of that project will receive those comments back. So communities will hear from others, the strengths of their project. Peer reviewers are asked to provide any hot tips or suggestions based on their own experience. So back to that livestock example, if you're a northern person that's raised livestock, you might have some really helpful tips for someone to consider as they move forward in similar types of work. They're asked to consider if there are other resources or experts in the field of that proposal that community group might want to meet to improve their just their connections and their opportunities for help on what they're doing, and any other comments that they want to give. But it's trying to help granting committees and the people that have written the proposals to see the strength in those proposals, to see the potential challenges they might come up against and help them prepare for that, and to build a network and community of people who are doing similar types of work. After each peer reviewer receives those 3 to 4 projects, they have a week to look them over, get to know them, and a very simple feedback form that covers those questions. And they send them back to our staff team. Each proposal has usually 3 or 4 peer reviewers that have given comment on them. So we like to have a diversity of voices on each proposal to give a nice, well-rounded sort of but reaction to the projects. And then at the end of the peer review process, we host 2 reflection calls. And that space is really for the peer reviewers themselves to talk about like what they got out of the process, anything they learned, suggestions they have for improving it. And I just feel so grateful when I'm part of those spaces. And I've learned so much about the value of the process from sitting in and listening to the peer reviewers talk about what it meant to them to be part of it and whether it was a good system that worked for them, whether they felt respected in their time and their knowledge.
Can you tell me, what was it like to be part of the peer review process?
I personally found it really interesting. It helped me connect with so many other small rural communities and learn about what they're doing, what they're up to. And it really got my brain excited. And it's got me thinking about things I'd like to get going in my own community and the surrounding areas.
I would echo what Suzanne said as well. It's really beneficial to see what other people are doing in their communities. And also, I remember before this process started, when I was first starting out, it kind of felt more like I was in a silo and I wasn't connected with people. And I feel like this format really supports people connecting to other people in their communities, because there's no real engagement other than sports activities or maybe some sweats. You'd go to other communities or stuff like that. But in terms of doing food related activities, when I was before this process, it felt like I was in a silo.
I just recently graduated high school, last year. So from grades 1 to up to 12, you learn about the geography of Canada year after year. But it's crazy, you don't even realize what all the communities located right next to your own. I've learned about reserves that I'd never heard of before that are essentially right in my own backyard. So it was really nice to feel that connection to places that I didn't even know existed, but I should have.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really stood out and I kind of loved the most about it is that it really painted a picture of everything, or not everything, but a lot of different work that's going on across the province, and really how complex the work is. So just to hear these different perspectives on food sovereignty, food sustainability, land-based work, it was really interesting to see all those voices come together. It was kind of a signal of just like how many people are putting effort in towards this work and how much more need there is to create those forums like that peer review process where those voices can come together, because like the creating space for collaboration is in my opinion just such a valuable thing that is not utilized as much as it possibly could. And I think that what came out of that peer review process, at least some of those calls, especially with the follow-up peer review process, is that there's like a hunger for more people to have these conversations, whether it be, these learning tables where they're talking about specific topics, or whether or not it's just, updating on what's going on in their respective communities. And it helps to keep an up-to-date idea of, the landscape around the work that we're all doing. So I really enjoyed just the sheer amount of people that are in the same line of work that are still so passionate and so interested in doing this work, and also equally passionate about supporting other projects that are going on.
So it's interesting to me that the peer reviewing process really opened your eyes and brought connection. I wonder, have you had the opportunity to learn from any of the other grants? Or like Brian is saying, is there an opportunity to learn from each other through the peer reviewing process?
Absolutely. I was, like I said, I was really inspired by the different projects I was reading about, and just excited at people's, I'm going to say, commitment to helping the people in their community have more accessible, opportunity to food, something so many people take for granted. And in rural communities, I met people that will tell me it takes them 3 or 4 hours just to get to a grocery store. That's something that a lot of parts of Canada don't have any knowledge or awareness of. And I'm fortunate where I live, we actually have 4 places actually we can go and buy food. Yet we still sometimes are struggling.
Yeah, like for coming up with ideas or getting inspiration as well. It's good for myself to like shift my perspective to see how other people are approaching projects related to food. So like, even though like I might not always get a good idea that I want to try from them, I at least get like some kind of different angle of how they're trying to approach things.
I personally got a lot of gardening projects because of my work with the Opaskwayak Cree Nation Community Garden. And all the ideas in the gardening projects, I was just like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. So it definitely inspired me to do a lot of the things I read about.
That's a unique approach to peer reviewing, in which you are matched with projects that you feel like you can contribute towards or speak towards. It's really interesting to me because so much of peer reviewing and funding and granting processes are based on these notions of objectivity, that we should not know information about the people, that we should not, hear people's stories, because that makes us subjective. And that's kind of I think, a dangerous idea for a lot of granting agencies. But can you talk a little bit about that, about this like personal connection that you had in the granting process? What do you feel like you were able to contribute because of that? And conversely, what did you receive? How did you benefit?
We aren't part of the actual granting committee. We're just peer reviewers. We give them suggestions. We tell them what they're doing well. We're able to really soak in the ideas and see their ideas brought to life in ourselves, if that makes sense. Not only that, like, I can give them advice about things that I think could work better in their project. There's a box that we had where it said, do you have any advice for this project? So I know one project was struggling with their soil not having enough nutrients. So I suggested composting if they don't do that already.
And I think for me, it sort of demystified the whole grant writing process, because I've never actually been involved in that. And I learned that it's really about telling your story and demonstrating to the people that will approve or not, what it is you're trying to create. And so with that in mind, I realized sometimes there were some things I didn't understand. So I was able to offer some questions that would maybe help them expand their vision and clarify that for the potential funders. So I was hoping that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, the proposal that I got was a project that we took upon the past couple of years too. So I felt like I had a lot of suggestions that I could give, not necessarily like do it this way or do it that way, but like watch out for this, watch out for that, because these are some challenges that you may face, and these are challenges that we faced when we took upon that project. Another thing that the collaborative does pretty well, I think, is that they guide us to come at it from a strength-based perspective. So us, rather than being too critical, we're more focused on how do we want this project to succeed and how could we help that project to succeed. No, definitely, because when you're reading a proposal, you're like trying to grasp the idea that they're trying to give to you, and you can notice like maybe something like maybe if they worded it this way a little bit different, then I would understand it differently, and then that becomes like a process of like self-reflection for myself, where I'm like, okay, I saw this example, maybe I can make these adjustments for myself in terms of like grant writing.
Okay. Yes. So in terms of what I was being able to give, I have spent a number of years, and I'll always say that I'm a young learner in this work, but I've spent a number of years trying to bring my learning around Indigenous education, supporting Indigenous communities to a level that's respectful of the communities I'm working with. So when I approached this process, one of the pieces I was very cognizant of is that it wasn't just me representing me, it was me representing communities and the work that they're doing. So one of the pieces I really wanted to make sure I was conveying in that is that I'm not really giving any part of me, I'm giving a reflection of the people I work with, the communities I work with. So I wanted to be very careful with that, and celebrating the work that they wanted to get done, respecting where I could and could not speak on their behalf. But really advocating for what they wanted to see done, whether that's because they didn't have the time, because there's lots on the plates, or they didn't have the comfort or confidence to pursue these granting processes because they can be daunting to others. So that's where I felt I was able to bring something to the process, but also bring something to the process on behalf of the communities, is that comfort and that growth I've been going through in advocating for the communities I work with, I represent, I spend my year with on a week-to-week basis. I think that your team gives a lot of motivation to really bring some of those ideas to the next step, whether or not that's going from a grain of sand to like a ball of sand in your hand, right? Like it's not changing too much in size, but it's that motivation, that encouragement, that at least from my perspective, I was able to bring back to the communities I work with as well. And that excitement just started to snowball. So that was the first thing in terms of the gift that we received. And then after that, as that network, as that circle widened and more voices were brought together, facilitated by the process, it amplified that effect, right? And this idea of like a knowledge transfer or a knowledge exchange I don't think there's anything more valuable than that.
Grant writing is such an intimidating process, and especially where there's contexts where we're talking about, like Suzanne said, rural communities in which food environments look completely different, or Indigenous communities where food environments look completely different. I think it's wonderful that you have the opportunity to see, in your case, Brian, really from both sides of this experience, and the idea that writing a grant can be an experience of connection, of bringing people together, of providing a kind of nourishment, instead of feeling alienated or instead of feeling isolated, which grants are really known for. I wonder, how does a process like this support northern and rural communities?
So it's an interesting process that is pretty unique in the granting world. It's not often that you have that much human connection through the granting process. So it really gave them an opportunity to share their passion and their excitement and their long-term vision for a project rather than trying to condense it to 750 words on an online database. And I'm not criticizing every grant out there, but this process was definitely much less stressful and much more engaging for the community members that were a part of it.
I think the obvious one is it really provided a vehicle for connection, because I know several of us said it would be great to develop some sort of a networking list. So after the process, we would have a means to connect with each other, and find out where our interests overlapped or things we wanted to learn more about. I found that really exciting.
Yeah, as well as for someone just starting out to write grants or make proposals, this is like a very user-friendly way to get started in that process. Yeah, definitely I've been a part of some grants where there's like ones and zeros, and I feel like with here there's a lot more I don't know, dynamics. There's a lot more dynamic as compared to a requirement and then meeting that requirement or expectation, meeting that expectation. There's still that, obviously, but I mean, the communication and the collaboration really makes it a lot more entry level friendly.
Well, it definitely creates a less daunting environment, right? I think one of our biggest barriers, at least working with some of our school administrators that I work with, is time, and it's the one shortcoming that a lot feel is that not having enough time to commit to that. And I think actually, if that was able to be managed, then I think actually one day I would love to see the voices that I was representing take my place, right? And have those voices, because in the communities that I was working with, those are extra voices that are living in those communities directly that should be at the table, should be sharing their thoughts on whether it be programming or their thoughts on other people's projects or whatnot, right? So even having conversations with some of the administrators I was working with, it just seemed more relaxed, less pressure, less deadline, less ambiguous. And I think that was really important for them to see where they could, when they were sharing their ideas about where they wanted to go with, whether project or project planning, it just felt like having a conversation. It didn't feel like, you're trying to hit all the buzzwords and you were trying to roadmap out something that wasn't necessary. Typically grants, you're just looking for the funding. What this process really shed light on is that it's more than just the money. It's like the intangible pieces that come along with it too, the conversations, the learning, the inspiration. Was it Michaela shared about the idea that it can be a much better process to acquire funding for projects, and it could be a whole lot more than that as well. They're really excited about. It's more excitement than it's fear, right? Usually with a grant process, it's either fear or excitement. And most times it's fear because it's okay, this project is hinging on this. When in some cases, this process actually kind of reinvigorated excitement behind it as well, because it got people back to those roots of where these ideas came in the first place. And that was just likely sitting around a table having a conversation about something that could be really good for a community.
Gosh, this must have been a decade ago when I was a peer reviewer. And what struck me from this experience, and I remember very specifically, one of the questions was around support and sort of social capital. And this particular application that I was reading it listed the names of the people who were going to be involved. And it was like, this person and this person and this person, those are my neighbors. This person, this person, this person, they're my family. And I remember, because I thought, well, that's how we know it's going to happen, that this person went out ahead of time and, got permission and consent from people to support this project. I just thought that was one of the greatest examples of community strength that you could see, is this commitment that other people were making towards the granting process. But it's unlikely you would ever see that in any other granting process, where it's like an opportunity for someone to list the names of their family to say, here are the people who are going to support my work. I'm wondering, did anything surprise you from this process?
I was actually pretty surprised that we were able to get everyone on the same call, and that in itself is a challenge. And the format of online speaking is always a challenge. So that many people, I think it was broken up into two days and two groups. But even then, that's a challenge to get that many people and that many opinions all together. But it was a little surprising.
And I guess for me, that just really spoke to the level of commitment that people have to sort of the larger mission of making food more accessible to people. And so I got a sense of, it's like everybody's cheering everybody on, and wouldn't it be great if every single proposal could receive a grant? There wasn't a sense of competitiveness that sometimes I think I've been led to believe can happen in some granting processes. And so there's a little bit of holding your cards close to your chest, whereas this way it felt like everybody's trying to help everybody. Even, I know I was very, Brian spoke about strength-based, and I know I was definitely trying to have that mindset when I was reviewing the ones that I was doing. And I was trying to be very careful with my words about how can I help them beef this up versus tearing it apart. You would never want to do that.
I definitely was surprised going into it about how many ideas were good ideas. Don't get me wrong, I did expect really good ideas to come out of it, but every project seemed so powerful. I really underestimated how, when someone puts forth a grant and wants to do good in their community, how powerful that is. And it's always backed behind good ideas.
The new learning was definitely I expected it to be, and this is only because I was fresh to the process. I expected it to be quite robotic, and it's just do this step, but it was not. It was such a warm, welcoming space to share your thoughts. And even though you could tell the people that were more seasoned at this process than others, there wasn't some delineation where it's okay, we're going to make more space for Johnny because he's been doing this for 5 years. Shay, pipe down, because you've only been here for a little while. So that was nice, because that's not always the case, right? Especially for newer people to processes as well. I think the only other piece that really, really surprised me was just how open this group, the collaborative group, was to inviting change, letting outside voices inform their change. And I think that happens. You go through a process where things you do internally kind of inform where you need to grow and change, but then inviting outside voices from a pile of different organizations to almost critique the process, right, it's a pretty humbling and vulnerable position to be in, right? Because it could very much go a way of saying, this process be damned, right? This is not working for anybody. But probably never happens like that, because right from the get-go, you're creating a space to have those informative voices grow this to where it needs to be, because it's not meant. It's not it's not a power dynamic where you feel between other granting processes, right? You don't feel it's here's this intangible person who's just giving us money, and then that's the relationship, money, and that's it. So that, again, I could tell that there was a better human connection from the beginning, but just how expansive or how constant that human contact, that that relationship building that happened during this process, not just from applying for the projects themselves, but being part of the peer review process itself. And then even now this conversation is still going on about how this network of individuals can support each other and share the knowledge even further. It's definitely a breath of fresh air.
That's how it should be, though, right? I mean, we're talking about food. Should we be in competition with each other over our ability to feed ourselves and our families and our communities? It strikes me as a bit bonkers. We should be encouraging. We should be cheerleading. We should be finding ways to support each other, to eat well, to be well. Is there anything else that you guys want to add that you feel like I haven't covered?
I guess all I would add is just that how wonderful it is that there was actually peer review versus just, the collaborative sat down around their giant table and just did their thing. Because this is setting the stage for future, and who knows what will spin out of all of this. I think it's lovely.
It's certainly modeling a kind of governance style that I think we're all in agreement that we want to see and need to see more of.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a kind of nourishment in a way. I mean, I know that I feel that way about my work, and in particular the work, like when I work with students especially, I find that it nourishes me because it does spark, it feeds my sense of hope about what the future has in store.
You read in the news all these bad things. There's so much hate in the world that you forget about all the good projects going on. You forget about that there are people who still want to do good things and want to help out the communities and make the world a better place. And it just really restores your faith in humanity, reading about all these projects.
We've heard from the peer reviewers. I wonder, Julie, if you can talk about what the other people involved in the granting process, those who are directly responsible for the decisions, how do they benefit from the comments and feedback given by the peer reviewers?
We haven't done the peer review process every single year that the NMFCCC has existed. And the years that we've been able to support a well-run peer review process, it has been very, very clear that the granting committees were much better equipped to have their conversations and make their decisions. And they learned so much more. The granting committee, the people that comprise the granting committees they're often very far away from these communities that are proposing the projects. They're often in urban centers in southern Canada or even outside of Canada. And they want to learn more about and understand better this territory that we serve of northern Manitoba. The granting committees want to learn about northern Manitoba, about what's realistic for communities in northern Manitoba, about what works in those communities. And they want to improve their own capacities around being good grant makers. So the peer review process is very much intended to support communities that are submitting proposals. It's intended to support grant makers who are trying to work in a different and better way and center community voices. And it's intended to support the peer reviewers themselves. They're certainly providing knowledge and a surface, but we are really hopeful and intentional about building reciprocity into that. So peer reviewers are getting a lot out of the process themselves as well. Hearing other things that peer reviewers gained from being part of the process just continues to motivate us to spend, it's a considerable amount of time and energy that it takes to do this well. We have to communicate really well with all the people who've agreed to spend their time doing peer review, running the orientation and the reflection sessions, also providing an anonymous internet-based feedback opportunity if there are things that people might want to share about how we can improve the process or things that weren't the best about it. We want to be able to provide them an anonymous way to do that. And then we annually create a learning report from it that is also shared back with all the peer reviewers and the collaborators. And of course, it's really important for us that peer reviewers are being honored for their time. So there's an honorarium that's provided to every person that participates. We want to not just, thank them with our words and our hearts, but also ensure there's financial support for the time and energy that they're spending on this process. So it takes it takes a lot of effort to do a good peer review process. And often I hear from other organizations, oh, that's so great, but we just don't have the time to do that kind of thing. And I kind of feel at this point, like if you're going to try and work in a good way with community, especially Indigenous community, you have to take the time to run a good granting process.
Thanks, Julie, and all the peer reviewers for giving us a thorough explanation of what the peer review process is all about and the opportunities to strengthen projects through community engagement. For more information about anything you heard, please check out our show notes. Thanks so much for listening.